Hello, everyone. This is your lovely host of the Empower to Empower You podcast, Mrs. B. Wendy Jackson. I hope that you're doing well today. If you have been listening to the podcast since January 2020, you already know that the podcast is about all things Jesus Christ, mental health, anything to help you think differently so you can live freely. You've probably heard the saying, if you change your thoughts, you change your life. I do believe that, but I also think that it takes more, obviously, than that in terms of thoughts and actions to be able to change your life, and that obviously accepting Jesus Christ to change your life. So there's a little bit more that goes into changing your life. However, we are here. So if you're tuning in for the first time, thank you so much. I want to let you know that every podcast episode is packed with information, inspiration, and insight. So you're going to learn something new every time you tune in. For those of you who've been listening and sharing and reviewing and giving reviews and ratings, excuse me, thank you so much for doing that. I am so excited because I love when guests come back. When the first conversation is so good and we're like, oh my gosh, we've got to have a part two. Here we are, a part two. So we have Miss Sandra here. If you remember, Sandra was on episode 200. She talked about nutrition, her faith fueled journey, food and nutrition. So you can go back and listen to episode 200, Sandra Pearce, and and listen more and tune into that episode. Today we're going to talk a little bit about a different topic, or go a different direction. Just quickly, Sandra is a mom. She's a speaker. She's a dietitian. She specializes in women's health and fertility nutrition. She's just try to love God, love people, and serve the world. I love that. What a beautiful, straight to the point bio. So we're going to talk a little bit about the stages of parenting, cop, coach, and consultant. Listen, and that is so dear to my heart. And I'm glad to have this conversation with you, Sandra. Welcome again.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm excited too. This is a fun. I love the part two. And
Yes.
getting to come back and yeah, look at this different direction. It's wonderful.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's so funny because I was looking, Focus on the Family has an article. I don't know if you're familiar with Focus on the Family, but they have an article and it broke down the different stages. And obviously there's a background to that where this father is talking to somebody about his son who's probably 19 or a teenager, and somehow the conversation is sort of something like, so yeah, tell me about your son. And he sort of talking about how he gets his son up for bed, like he literally wakes him up. He's a teenager. And then the person says, you wake up your son for school? Like, shouldn't he be waking himself up? And that kind of opened his eyes to, like, he was doing something in the wrong, a different type of parenting, but in the wrong stage. And so we're going to talk a little bit about these stages. Now, Focus on the Family identifies as interesting, and I want to know what you think about this. The first stage that they identified in the article is commander, which is
Oh.
basically about dictatorship. You're telling your child when to eat, when to sleep, when to poop, when to go
Mm-hmm.
whatever, right? You're the one that's
Yeah.
kind of like in command. And then it goes from commander to coach, which is more about the encouraging stage and come on, let's do this. And
Mm-hmm.
and then from there to the counselor stage, so that
Mm-hmm.
preteen, middle school, supporting with decisions. And from there, consultant, which is the hardest stage because
Mm-hmm.
this is where you are focusing on letting go. You cannot be a helicopter parent when your child is 19, 20 years old, unless, let me give a disclaimer, your
Mm-hmm.
child has a developmental disability,
Mm-hmm.
some type of mental health crisis, and or physical health crisis, maybe fragility of some kind, right? And you kind of have to parent a little bit more sensitively. So now let's get into it. Let's get into it.
Yeah.
First, tell us, what stage of parenting are you currently at right now?
Yeah. So I am I call it the I'm the tween stage. Like I'm really still coaching, but we're really headed into like a counselor type stage, right? So
Mhm,
my child's in the teenage years,
mhm,
but they are also navigating them very well. And so I get to pull back a little bit on the coaching piece of it and be a little bit more of the counselor piece of it.
Yeah.
And I think that that's so wonderful. It's interesting, those different stages. The command is an interesting one.
Yeah.
Um, just a way of putting that. But I think a good reminder is that everybody's children are different. So I like the fact that you put the disclaimer in there, because everybody is different and has a different set of needs, which means the stages are going to look a little different.
Yes.
And the way you utilize, your skill set at each of those is going to look different, just depending on your specific child.
Absolutely.
Um, yeah, and I think we sometimes forget that, and we don't give ourselves the amount of grace we need as parents, as we're
Absolutely.
creating the
Because
playbook.
absolutely, that's such a great disclaimer because as people are listening, I don't want you to
Mhm.
listen and think that, oh my gosh, I did something wrong. Oh my gosh, my child is
Yeah.
not, my child is not thriving because every household is different, every parent is different.
Mhm.
So many factors can influence this: culture, faith and religion,
Yeah.
like language
Hmm.
barriers, upbringing, generational practices, um,
Yeah.
climate. I mean, so many things can affect parenting. So, and I
Yeah.
think it's so good to give the disclaimer because
Yes.
many times we fall into a trap of comparison. We look at what this child is doing. Oh my gosh, why is this child? I don't know about you, but I know how many times have we gone to the store? For some reason, I want to say Walmart because Walmart,
Hmm.
different
I
things
have some
happen
stories.
at Walmart. Okay. It's never Kroger in my experience. It's like Walmart, you're gonna see it all. So how many times
Hmm.
have we gone to the store and we see this child who may be about 4 or 5 or even 6 and is bawling and screaming and having temper tantrums about cookies that he wants mom to buy.
Hmm.
And she's like ignoring him. She's like, nope, you're not gonna have cookies. And this child starts jumping up and down and yelling and like the social worker in me is like, what is going on? And not to be judgmental, but it's like I'm looking at my son like, you better not, like you will never act like this, like just what a beautiful example to just kind of look, and it can be hard because, but what we
Yeah.
don't know, everybody has a story. I don't know the
Yeah.
story of this mama. I don't know
Hmm.
struggles and what she's having to deal with. She may be a caregiver. She may be at the end of her rope and
Hmm.
she may not be able to display the appropriate amount of grace in parenting at the store. It's very
Hmm.
frustrating to take your kids, your littles, to the store. It is
Yeah.
hard.
It 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 is hard. It reminds me of a story I actually. People have opinions,
Yes,
right?
yes, yes, yes.
I when so my child's older now, but when she was in that stage, we were having uh, a discussion in the car. It was just the two of us, and we got out of the car, and she did not want to hold my hand, and I said, "You're not going to hold my hand. You're going to touch my side." Okay, totally fine. We're going to walk across the parking lot, or the parking lot, into the store together. And so she was doing that, and a lady driving by rolled down her window and proceeded to tell me that I needed to hold my child's hand when crossing the road. And
Wow.
I was a young mom, and I thought, I was mortified, right? And so it was a reminder to me, though, like you just said, like, we don't always know. We don't know what other people are going through, walking through, what that looks like in what they're trying to teach their child in that moment. And
Mhm.
so, yes, we can only know what we know. So, like today, anything that comes out of my mouth is only from my own, what I know from what I've seen, experienced, worked on, and I am learning every day new ways to
Yes.
do things.
Let's talk about how did becoming a mother change things for you? And you are a nutritionist.
Mhm.
This becoming a mom also changed your perspective on food. And so talk a little bit about the impact and the change in perspective.
Yeah. So actually becoming a mom, it definitely it changed everything. So um I was not a dietitian before becoming a mom. I actually owned a restaurant with my mom, so I was still in the food world. And once I became a mom, the shift was in multiple areas. So I started looking at things so different, right? Your eyes become open because life is no longer just about you.
Yeah.
You're now taking care of another being. And so, family history for me is that a lot of females in my family tend to have cancer. And I started to really go, okay, there has to be a connection, a component that goes with what we do and how and these outcomes, right? Like, so what we put into our body has to matter. There's so much information out there. There's so much, right? It's overload. And I started to recognize I was watching, television shows and listening to podcasts and just trying to really dig through information. And so that's what opened my eyes to this world of like, I need to know truths when it came to food so I could better feed my child, feed myself, and potentially make these genetic, right? We can't change our genes, but we can change some of the outcomes. So what we're putting into our body matters. The other shift that I would say happened at the same time is I was actually in this season where I had not been going to church for years, but I
Hmm.
had grown up in church, and having my child really brought back this idea that I needed this community of faith because raising a kid is hard. And so I did not want to do it on my own. And so not
Yeah.
only having her changed my career path, sent me back to school to do that, but also got me plugged back in to church again. We started going and I started taking her to different churches. We started finding the one that was going to work best for us, which now we've been at ever since she was little and really plugging into that community. So having a kid changed my entire world and trajectory of
Yeah.
where I was headed in life.
Absolutely. It does change things.
Mm-hmm.
It really does change a lot
Yeah.
for us. It's interesting. It's interesting, and I can share my story later on, but it's one thing to know that you're pregnant and
Mm-hmm.
to carry this baby 9 months unless there's something out of order and you preterm and all that, unless there's complications. When it's a healthy pregnancy, 9 months, right? And so you have this preparation time. It's another thing when God says, the doctor says you cannot have children, right? And then God blesses you with a husband and with the same package blesses you with a 3-year-old child that you are now instantly
Yeah.
mom.
Yeah.
That is
Yeah.
my story.
Oh my
That
goodness.
is my story. And so I'm still adjusting. This child is once 3 year old is now 6 years old and
Yeah.
it journey, but I didn't have that preparation time. I was focused on preparing for being a wife, not
Yeah.
preparing for being a mom. And so it's like, okay, so here I am on the
They're like, and you are a cop today.
I'm a cop immediately. No experience. I am in the
Yeah.
cop stage. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that definitely, again, that brings us back to that idea of like everybody's in a different space. And so
Absolutely.
you as a mom, you get to like see them as they get like raised up and their personalities and all their uniqueness and kind of make these adjustments and tweaks as you go along. And so getting
Yeah.
thrown straight into a 3-year-old, because I will tell you that when my child hit 3, I was like, who called it terrible twos? Like, the
God.
threes are when they really start pushing those boundaries, at least for
Mhm.
me.
Mhm.
That was boundary pushing time.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. So we
Mm-hmm.
know that parenting requires a lot of adaptation, a lot of
Yeah.
adjustment, a lot of flexibility.
Mm-hmm.
So how have you, I know that you said you're still in the kind of coaching towards counselor. You're not yet a consultant. How old is your daughter, if you don't mind sharing?
15.
15. So you are definitely in the counselor stage.
Yeah.
So how have you navigated? Well, how have you navigated the shift from being cop, where
Yeah.
you're like consequences, you do this, you're gonna time out. Okay, you're gonna get a spanking. Okay, go, how have you
Yeah.
navigated from cop to more of a coach counselor stage?
Yeah. I think the shift kind of happens naturally.
Yeah.
Um, because you have this, you're setting up boundaries and you're setting up a um like, specific structure. I'm actually going to probably derail a little bit. I'm going to go backwards on that. I think depending on how you set up your previous stages makes a huge difference.
That's true. Yes.
So when I was in the younger years stage, like I mentioned, the walking across the street story of having a conversation with her first and letting her make that decision, like, I don't want to hold your hand this time, which by the way was completely outside of her character, which is why we stopped, paused, had a conversation. This is what we're going to do. Um, and she was not a great listener. So it was, oh, you had to like set these boundaries up. I learned really, really quickly to make sure to set boundaries that I could follow. Because so often I think boundaries get set because this is what we're supposed to do, our expectations of other people. And so for me, I was like, what can I actually follow through with? Because if I can't follow through with it, I should not set this as a hard, solid boundary.
Yes.
Because that's when they start recognizing I can push past those, right? So that again, trial and error, but that's kind of that stage. And so leading into this idea of coaching, then they trust you because you set boundaries that you stuck with. So there was a good level of trust as we shifted from that more cop stage into more of the coaching stage of like, if you fall, I'm not standing next to you holding your hand anymore, maybe, but you can come, let's talk through it. And then building those skill sets, because that's my job, right? In this next stage is I was a softball player, and so I just think of that idea of like during practice, we talk through everything, we practice the skill, right? But I'm getting you ready to go play the game. I'm still your coach. I'm going to be on the sideline, but you got to be able to play the game by yourself. You got to be able to go to school. You got to be able to deal with hard conversations. You got to be able to deal with other people. They're going to ask you to push the boundaries that you know are in place. What are you
Mhm.
going to do about it in that situation?
That's
So our
good.
home time and our time together at church, because another piece of that is I have chosen since her younger years to be invested. So we in children's ministry in church and in now in youth ministry, I've always been a leader. So even if I wasn't in her classroom, I was present. So I always showed up and was present and available.
Yeah.
And so building that structure in to where when she was off, right, by herself, now that she's in high school, she will now come home and be like, X, Y, and Z happened. This is what I did, or this is what I said, or this
Mhm.
is something that I'm not sure about that was said to me and I didn't know how to respond. So we built that in over the years so that way we have that now.
That's so good. That's so good. So part of being a coach, part of being able to function as a coach in this
Mm-hmm.
stage is also being able to coach ourselves as parents,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, I had this moment where our son went to this new school. We took him out of public school. He's now in private school, a private Christian school, so that he can
Yeah.
be discipled, not only at church, but at school. And I
Mm-hmm.
remember the first couple of weeks, we would, it's almost like the coaching. Okay, you're going to have a great day. Remember who you are. You are in Christ, praying over him and all the things. And when we get to the door, it's like this hesitation of going to the door. Because I'm like, I can't go to the door with you, son. I'm right
Mm-hmm.
here. They're going to open the door. He was so afraid it's almost like this, oh no, mom is about to leave and I'm about to go into this new place that I don't know about for the first time. And we can't go to the door. We have to be in the car because it's a car line. But
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of coaching. But if I didn't have the emotional intelligence or the lack of that, maybe I could have been frustrated or
Yeah.
impatient. I mean, hurry up. I gotta go to work. Just imagine a parent who's maybe not emotionally in tune
Yeah.
or doesn't have, maybe is so bogged down, stressed out, that doesn't
Mm-hmm.
have the patience you have to be able to have the patience to be able to coach your
Yeah.
kid, and you have to coach yourself. Like
Oh
that,
yeah.
a whole lot, whether that looks like taking some mommy time, stepping away, taking some deep breaths. So how did you coach yourself? What are some things that you did to just kind of like, okay, I've got to coach myself because this little girl is pulling from me
Mm-hmm.
so much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, I was laughing as I was kind of thinking about that. I'm like, in our career, we have to do CEUs, right? To be a
Yeah.
dietitian, my continuing education credits. I was like, where is that for parents, right? Where do we get our like,
Oh my
where do we
gosh.
get our
Yes.
CEUs,
Yes.
right? Every year you have to get so many of them,
Mhm.
um, to keep up and like do that. Uh, so when it comes to coaching myself, here's what I'm going to say. Uh, I learned very early that parenting, you can't do it alone.
Yes.
And it is exhausting and you're going to make mistakes every day and you're going to have to sometimes say you're sorry. And I started being very intentional of paying attention to other parents around me. I actually do this in my career as well as I was like learning how to become a dietitian, right? That idea of like there are things I'm going to take from people that I'm like, "Oh, that's good. I like that." There were
Yeah.
words that I would take from her daycare when she was in daycare. And I was like, oh, that's a really good phrase, sentence, whatever. And then there were things that I would see of individuals that I'm like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to look like that. I don't want to be that. How do I make sure that I don't find myself in that situation? Because, like I said, it's a lot to be a parent. There are days where you do
Yeah.
not make the right choice, where you are overwhelmed and frustrated. Um, I I will say that on occasion, I started a thing called it was my mom's done time, and so there was a certain time that it was like mom's off duty. I will not answer any questions right now. I am gone, and I would literally remove myself from the room, and I would be like, "It is your time to do this. I will be back on duty in a minute." And so I had to find words
Love
to
that.
to
Off duty.
explain like I need a minute. I'm going to
Yeah.
separate myself because what was coming up was not what I wanted to come out, of myself.
Yes. Yes.
And so that is how I learned to be able to like handle some of those. Um, and now that she's older, I can be like, I just look and she's like, got it. Right. Like we had enough words in those younger years where she understood like I love you. And I actually will tell her that. I'm like, she'll ask me something, I'll be like, I love you. I'll be back. And I'll have to like walk away and excuse myself. So I can call it mommy timeout, maybe.
I love it. We need mommy
And then
time out.
100%.
Yes.
And then being intentional about my community. And so with that idea of like going back to church, we have a thing called life groups, so small groups. And that took me years. I don't want anybody to ever think like I can't, my child's too small. Like it took me until the first few years of going to church, I couldn't do them. I tried. It was just too much between work and being a mom and everything else. But as soon as I found a life group that worked with my schedule, that I could get involved with other adults and
Yeah.
and and invest in myself, take a time away from being a mom, but instead reconnecting with my relationship with God and with other adults. And then from that group, I found a really amazing core group of actually moms that we
Wow.
get together. They're families, but with the moms and I get together, and we would do when our children were younger, we would do like once a week, like mommy play dates, right? Where we could be together, the kids could be together. We were in a faith-based community and supporting each other. And that for me was a saving grace. And even now, we still get together and do dinner nights. We let the kids hang out and do movies, or they go outside and play ball in the backyard, and we get to sit and chat. Life gets busy in different seasons, make that ebb and flow, but just having people, and you have to be intentional. As a parent, life gets like you get sucked in. There's like so many things on your plate. You have to be intentional about finding those people,
Absolutely.
your people.
Absolutely. I need a mommy group.
Yeah.
So you are through the cop stage. I'm in it. What looking
Yeah.
back? I know that one of the things that you said that really worked well for you was seeking community, was learning from other people. What are some other things that maybe you did well? And also, I don't want to say regrets, but what are some things that you looking back in the cop stage you could have done differently?
Oh, I wish I knew all the things before I had to work through them.
But then you would have been
That's
able to tell it. You wouldn't have been able to tell it.
I wouldn't have been able to tell it. Ooh, what would I do different? I do wish I could go back and say I had more patience when I got tired. And so recognizing that sooner, because bedtime for some reason is the hardest. I'm like, well, you brush your teeth every day. Why every night is it a fight? And I will say that out of all of the moments of the day that I can come up with, bedtime is the one that like highlights. When you say like, what could you have done better? Preparing better for bedtime, finding a better way so it wasn't a fight. And to be fair, I don't actually know what that looks like. So I am sorry. I am not full. Maybe you have the wisdom, maybe you figured out bedtime. But yeah, it's like when I'm tired and they're
Yeah,
tired and they didn't want, that it's always has to be more words it felt like than were needed.
right, right. You know, one thing that we found that works well is transition, like transition in
Hmm. Hmm.
okay, so finish up and even if I say one more minute, he doesn't know that what that means. But
Hmm.
okay, do one more thing. You do one more thing, and then we got to get ready for bed. Or finish this
Hmm.
up. Finish putting away your toys. We got to get ready for prayer before bed.
Hmm.
We found this little, this little timer. It's like an hourglass timer with the sand in it that when you turn it over. So
Yeah.
using that to brush your teeth because we found that he was just brushing his teeth, but the toothpaste was in the sink. And so, now it's like you don't stop brushing your teeth until that timer, the sand goes down all the
Uh-huh.
way. Yeah, the one of the hardest things was transitioning from showers with dad to showers on your own. And so now initially it's like, okay, you got to start taking showers on your own and all the tears, all the breakdowns. And so now it's like we've overcome that. I feel like there's been little things that were difficult, and there's a whole lot to our story too that we've had to navigate from a child who had a very unhealthy attachment, insecure attachment,
Mhm.
with the fear-based thinking, the I need to be close to you and I don't want to be alone. I'm scared to be by myself type of thing, to now moving towards what looks like a healthy attachment. That's a whole thing. I would have to do a whole nother episode
Yeah.
just for that, right? So we've seen a lot of transitions. So I am grateful for every moment of yes, this is
Hmm.
independence. This is what we want. So yeah, there's I see exactly what you're saying. And even now, if we're like, okay, time for bed, we've prayed, all the things, and now we're seeing I want to give you one more hug. And this is like the fifth hug, right? Mom, I want to sleep in your bed. No, 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 no. We're not doing that. You're not sleeping in our bed, sir. We've never allowed
Hmm.
that. You're not sleeping in our bed, not at 6 years old. We've never even done it before. And so just kind of like recognizing that, okay, what's the need? You've heard the acronym probably HALT. Hungry, angry, lonely, tired. Is it a need for food? Is it a need for affection? Is it because I'm lonely and I just need physical touch?
Hmm.
Or is it just I'm tired? And so recognizing that for us too,
Yeah.
because I'm not very patient if I'm tired, right? Like I'm
Hmm.
just not. Like I don't think I'm bearing the fruit of the spirit, love, joy, peace,
Hmm.
kindness, patience, goodness, gentleness, self-control when I'm tired. And so,
Yeah.
so having to be aware, and I love how you said, okay, mom's not available. And there have been some times I've said, if he's calling mom or dad 18 times in 1 hour, I've
Hmm.
had to literally say, mom's not here. Mom, don't call my name. Mom's
Hmm.
in a loving, funny way, of course.
Yes.
So definitely. It's interesting.
Hmm. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Like I said,
Mhm.
you have to figure out the right rhythm and the
Oh
right
my God.
flow.
Yes.
And it's huge for me that they can count on you, that you always show up when you say you're going to
Yes.
show up, right? Um, that it's not a scared thing. We set boundaries, we set rules, but those are for their protection,
Mhm.
not to hurt them or not to make them angry. But these are things that we need to know are there, but you can always come to me, right? Like that whole like so finding that line between being the boundary setter and being firm, but also using those fruit of the spirits, being joyful and loving, because they're
Yeah.
not out of anger.
No.
And so
Mm-mm.
when those boundaries and stuff can get set and you're like, they're out of love. And even when you push the boundary and I have to enforce the boundary, it's out of love.
It's out of love. Absolutely. What do you think about even when we're setting boundaries? Like, for example, when we set in those boundaries, especially between even in the coach stage, I mean, now you
Yeah.
still set boundaries, right?
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
when, if you have a kid who's like just quick to like meltdown,
Mm,
and parents, unfortunately, again, who may have to be coached themselves, sometimes
hmm
they give in to the meltdown.
hmm
And I'm really big about saying, my husband hates when he not I hates, but he just doesn't like when he's always crying. And I'm like, well,
Yeah.
baby, let him
Yeah.
cry. Boys are allowed to cry because I don't want that's a therapist in me. Thank God that child has a therapist for his mama. Because I'm like, I don't want my son to grow up as an emotionally repressed man. Like,
hmm
like we see them all the time, men who don't
Yeah.
are not emotionally available. They are not expressive. They're not allowing themselves to even show their emotions because somebody did not allow them to cry because somebody said, boy, what you crying for? Man up, all those
hmm
toxic messages. And so what do you think that is for parents, or what word of wisdom would you share with parents who maybe just need to replace the giving into the meltdown and allowing the meltdown, but
Yeah.
how to redirect it? Like what are some things? And I don't know, maybe you're thinking, well, be Wendy, I don't know if I should be the one to answer this question, but I don't know. Just
Yeah.
what do you think?
Oh, goodness. Oh, yeah. So the meltdowns are not easy.
They're not.
And uh, they're usually not in a good timing. And
Yeah.
that I think is more of the problem that I recognized in parenting was that I was too busy. Life was too
Yeah.
busy. Um, that sometimes you don't have time for the meltdown. And that's really hard.
That's tough. Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and that changes it, right? Because when you got time for the meltdown, it's a whole different ball game. It
yeah.
actually, when you were talking about that, I was laughing because it reminded me of a story, and I made the individual men and women, by the way, are also built different. We were made different for different reasons. We raise children different, and it helps them adapt and it helps them to be able to navigate different situations. So it's okay. It was one of the best things I loved about one of my psychology classes. It's okay that
Okay.
mom is more like structured and sit down, and dad comes home and wrestles with them and plays, and then mom gets mad and is like, I just had them cleaned up and ready to eat and sitting quietly, and you just can't and destroy the moment, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And it's okay because then they have to learn how to go from that to going back to their seat, getting ready to eat. And so they learn how to navigate these emotions, these like heightened senses of different things, which is okay. But I had when my daughter was little, she had put a toy on the ground and I had asked her to put it away. Simple. Pick it up, put it back in the and put it away, right? Mm-mm. And I was like, uh-uh. Like we don't uh-uh. And I was like, we're gonna put it away. And she wouldn't. And so I said, well, we're gonna take a minute then and sit. And I made her sit and I sat there and I was like, this is like a crossroad for parents. Like you have time to figure this out, right? Of going, what am I going to do? And this was a moment that I actually had time to deal with a meltdown. And so I said, we're going to pick it up. She would stand back up off of her chair and literally would melt on the floor like she had no limbs, no arms, no legs. She would just down to the floor. And I was like, what are you doing? You need to put your toy away. Mm-mm, back to the chair. So I had her sit in the chair 45 minutes. Now, for most people that are listening, are probably going to be like, are you kidding me? And the person that was at my house at the time happened to be a male. And he was like, are you kidding me? Pick the toy up and throw it away. This is ridiculous. But it was a really odd moment for me because for when I had time for this, and we went back and forth. We had tears. She was crying. Like this was the worst thing that had ever happened to her. And I just really felt like she has to learn, no matter how long it takes, the task I've asked her to do has to be done. If
Yeah.
you take it away, now what are you going to do? Make her sit for 5 minutes and time out? Like that's the goal is to finish what was asked, whether they
Mhm.
want to do it or not. She may not want to do it and she has to do it. And I had the time and the space to be very patient with it. We didn't give in, we didn't give up. You have a choice. We sit there quietly until you pick up your toy, and we'll just continue to sit here. You don't get to play, you don't get to do things. And it was a really like, I frustrated the other individual to no end. And I think that the reason this is coming to mind is I want people to recognize, like, every situation calls for something a little different sometimes. And you can't always go off of what other people are thinking, because that judgment of ourself and like what comes into play. And if we're to get frustrated, our actions may not actually be serving in the long run of like, what did they need? And in that moment, I really, like, my spirit felt like she has to learn to follow through with what's been asked, whether she wants to do it or not. And that's a hard lesson even for adults to learn. Um, but in
Yes,
those moments where you don't have time, those get tricky.
yes, it does. Wow,
The meltdowns get tricky.
they do.
Um,
Do.
meltdowns at church are tricky, by the way. I had a rule that I set when she was little, and we have to show up. God doesn't care what you wear, he cares that you show up. So we went to church in her pajamas, in onesies, in weird looking outfits. And when she had meltdowns and didn't want to go, we would sit and watch in the lobby. We would take a break in the bathroom for a minute. Once our tears were out, we would go back and we
Mm,
would sit down and we would finish service. And those are situations that I don't know if I navigated them right, but I navigated them the best I could.
right.
And now she serves in children's ministry and does all the things as a teenager, and like,
Yes,
so it worked out well.
yes,
But in those moments, they're challenging.
absolutely, absolutely. Well, let's. I could talk to you for hours, and I want to try to land a plane. So for that mom who's listening, I know that both of us are not yet in the consultant stage. The consultant
Yeah,
stage is hard. The consultant stage is the hardest stage. The
yeah,
consultant stage when your child is about 19, 20, they finished middle school, they probably are about to graduate or finish about close to graduate or just graduated from high school. They're about to ready to be launched out into the deep.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
um, into the world. And so one of the challenges that many parents have is trying to
Mm,
hold on. And I find it confusing. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, and you have the authority to do so, even on air. I struggle when I hear parents say, "Oh my gosh, I don't want them to leave. They're crying." And I'm thinking, that's contradictory because isn't that what you prepare your child for? Don't get
yeah,
me wrong. I understand it's natural to
yeah,
have that grieving, like that, oh my goodness, my baby is no longer my baby. But isn't that what we've been working all along to prepare
yeah.
them to be launched?
Hmm.
What is the alternative? They stay home with us forever? Not.
Hmm.
Like, and so what would you say to that parent who is struggling? Maybe they're struggling at the cop. Let's just start with the cop stage. Let's go back to the cop stage a little bit. That's struggling. Maybe like, what were two words of advice? We just said that each child is different.
Yeah.
Each parent is different. Each home is different. And so if a parent has, and the amount of kids makes this even more difficult. I mean, I know
Hmm.
people with 6 kids,
Yeah.
with 3 kids. Can you imagine 3 kids in the cop stage? I cannot.
Hmm.
I
That was
cannot
my
imagine.
parents. That was my
Ooh,
parents. I have two sisters, and we're all like 12, 15 months apart. Like, yeah, we're like all right there. Hmm.
oh my gosh. I wish I could interview your mama. Like, what did you do? How did you do it?
Oh, that would be a whole nother episode, and I could give you some insight on that too. Uh,
Absolutely. Yes. But
yeah.
what word of wisdom would you share to that mom who's just feeling just tired? That's the best word, exhausted. And maybe she just needs a little bit of encouragement. What
Yeah.
would you say to that mom?
Uh, it gets better.
Yeah. Yeah.
Does. So it's an interesting thing being a parent, because each of the stages brings such new um, joy and challenges. And so I think, like you had mentioned about letting them go, I'm already thinking about that. My daughter's 15, but she's young for her age in high school. We only have a couple years left, and so I'm already thinking about that. Um, of like what is that going to look like in life when she goes. But I think of it kind of like bring it back to, you mentioned the cop stage of like letting them go to kindergarten, dropping them off the first day where they're no longer in your home every day, or you're taking them to daycare and picking them up. Like now they're becoming little people and they have to make choices without you present. You don't know all the things in the day, and so you drop them off, you've prepared them for the day, and you drop them off and you turn around, and if you're anything like me, you just cry as you leave, right? Like you just you just cry and you sit in your car. And for me, I just said a prayer of like, help me, help her. May this be like the best day, new day of this new space. And then
Yeah.
next thing you know, you blink and they're headed like they're fifth graders to like the big end, and then they're headed to middle school and you're starting all over, right?
Yeah.
And so I think as parents, we're being prepared just like we're preparing our kids for that
That's
each
good.
stage. Middle school gets through, high school is a whole nother learning curve. Freshman year is challenging. We're in sophomore year now ourselves. And so now it's like, I'm not the newbie anymore, but freshman year was hard. What are those expectations going to look like? What are the other students going to look like? And and then the next stage is letting them go. And so for one, it goes fast. So if I'm going
Yeah.
to say anything, it still feels like I'm still carrying her in a sling, walking around at work, right? Like this idea that now that's not the case, that instead she's, messaging me like, hey, mom, can I go to football games tonight? And I'm like, with who and who's driving, right? Like that's a
Yeah.
whole nother ball game of learning how to let go. And
Yeah.
so it goes by fast.
Mhm.
Um, don't sweat the little stuff. So I had a really big saying, and I actually wrote it down, that was like, pause before you say no. Because
Mhm.
so fast, our reaction, they ask us for something is no. And then it's
Mhm.
like, oh, wait, because now I've just set a boundary that I have to follow through with. And maybe it wasn't even a big deal.
Mhm.
So pausing before you say no and actually asking questions is really good. And I think as we move into that counselor stage and onto the consultant, my biggest thought with that was really to listen more than you speak. So often as parents, we like to just continue to give them advice, right? And work out the problems for them. But like, and I know just for what we do for career wise, is you have to sit back and just listen and come from a place of why and asking them questions as opposed to solving and giving them a solution.
That's good. That's good. I literally say to myself often, seasons change.
Yeah.
Seasons change. Like this is one season. Help me,
Yeah.
Lord, to enjoy the season and not
Yes.
endure the season.
Mm-hmm.
And seasons will change. They come and they go, and they go so quickly. They come so quickly. They go so quickly. So that is
Yeah.
really, really. I've learned too. One of the things that I've learned too that really helps, and you probably have practiced this. Even something subtle as simple as not no, but not right now.
Mm-hmm.
Not right now, but you know what? Let's look into this, give an alternative. So not right now, but we'll look into it for tomorrow, or we'll look into it this
Mm-hmm.
week, something like that. And I've also learned, this may sound weird, but to have a yes day,
Yeah.
a yes day, or yes
Yeah.
out. Just mom, can I do this? Yes. To like this is the yes day, right?
Yeah.
Well, depends on what it is. So I cannot say it just depends on what it
Yeah.
is. But that's really good. And while you were talking about letting kids as we transition, letting them go to kindergarten, I think for me too is recognizing they're not mine anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Like they belong to God. And so for me to think that God has just gifted me with this child to steward,
Mm-hmm.
right? But ultimately, it's God's little boy. And so
Yeah.
I'm not in full charge of this child. I'm not in charge of his life. Is the Lord's child. And so God, this is your son. Help me to parent him well, and so on and so forth. And so when you were saying, well, let them go to kindergarten, even the sense of that may be really hard for people who are homeschooling. Can you
Yeah.
imagine?
Mm-hmm.
How do you navigate it? Navigating those stages can be even difficult,
Yeah.
more interesting, if you will. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm actually walking through that with a really close friend of mine who's homeschooled their three children, all their life. And one of them just left for college. And so that has been a huge transition in their family as a whole, because their families used to always being together,
Yes.
as well as, for this. for the individual student who's not been away, right? That's going away and trying to figure out how to like create a new community on their own without being close to home. And so it's you know, as adults we're resilient, our kids are resilient. If we, whether they're homeschooled or whether they go to public school, they are going to be very, very, different based on surroundings and what that looks like. But God has a plan. And I always say, if you're following his plan
Yes.
for you, if you really truly believe that you're walking through the doors that he's opening and choosing to not walk through those that he's closing, things
Mhm.
will still be hard, but you'll have the tools you need to get through whatever's coming next. Because we're always in a training ground for
Yep.
what's coming next.
That's good. That's good. Wow, I enjoyed this conversation with you. Again, I know that we could not speak to the consultant stage because we're not there. We're not there yet.
Yeah.
We will be there soon at some point. Well, you'll be there sooner than I will.
It's,
Sandra, I know that I went longer than I normally do, but this was so good and I was enjoying the conversation with you. But is there any final, before you leave today, is there any final thing that you wish to share that I didn't ask you, or any final word of encouragement or anything?
mm, I would just say for all, I think we've already shared it all, but for parents out there or people that are looking to become parents and hoping for that for their future, there's so many joys in parenting. Make sure that you have some space for it. And when life gets full and busy, and everyone, by the way, is going to say like, what can go? What can you, get rid of because life's full and busy? There are things that sometimes we hold on to we don't need to. So take a peek at your inventory, and truly, truly spend time with your kids. Like I always tell people, if you don't need a gym membership, if you play with your toddlers, right? Like you will be sweating it out there. So invest and be intentional in your kids. If I had anything to say, the dishes will wait for tomorrow or an hour or whatever that looks like. Board games and laughter, those are priceless memories that they're gone in like a blink of an eye.
That's so good. Sandra, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for having me. I love chatting with you. It's
Me too.
wonderful.
Me too. Me too. Well, y'all, you learned, you listened to Sandra, you've heard her. I know that this will definitely enrich your life, depending on what season you're in or what season your children are in. Maybe you know somebody that could benefit. Maybe you're in a consultant stage and you're like, you know what? I am navigating that stage. Maybe you're an empty nester and you're maybe listening to this in reflection. Share this with somebody else that you know for sure may be in the cop stage, the coach stage, of the counselor or consultant stage. I really love those stages because it helps to put things in perspective and be able to
Mhm.
look back, not in regret, but in reflection. Because each moment is a teachable moment, not just for our children, but also for ourselves. If you want to connect with Sandra, she is a nutritionist. You can do that. You can go to her website at Sandra. Tell me,
Dash.
Sandra.
Yep. Sandra-Pierce.com. My Pierce is Pearce.
Absolutely. And you could follow her on IG at Sandra Pearce Nutrition, for sure, and just connect with her as well about her resources and her expertise as it relates to nutrition, fertility, and all things wellness. So thank you again, Sandra, for being here today.
Yeah,
Thank you
thank you.
for tuning into this podcast. This is B. Wendy Jackson, your lovely host, and I will be back next time with another empowering message. Have a wonderful week on purpose. Bye bye for now.